So it's so good to have you here, and we're going to continue our series called Life. How many of y'all believe that prayer is vitally important in the church? Absolutely. So there's 500 verses in the Bible that deal with prayer. How many of you would say that faith is important? There's tremendous stuff. There's 500 verses in the Bible that deal with faith. And the topic I'm going to talk about today, there's 4 times the amount of verses as there is for prayer and as there is for faith. There's 2,000 verses in the Bible that deal with money. And matter of fact, Jesus talked about money a lot. 16 of his 38 parables dealt with finances. And after I got done with this at the 9 o'clock and the amount of questions that I received, I realized we need to talk about it a whole lot more and really lay out things, because if the church doesn't talk about money, then that leaves the only people talking about money is the world and the world system of money. And so I wanted to talk about that. And I know that I need to talk about it because I just gave you some statistics. You're in a debt-free building. We're a debt-free church. We paid off our debt in 2012. And myself, along with the board of directors, we vote down any options for debt. So we're paying off that building as we go and making sure that we stay debt-free. And people say, well, man, this church is giving. And I'm very strategic in what I say. I never say that this church is a tithing church. I say it is a giving church. Our best month this year, our best statistical month this year, only 43% of this church gave. That's not even tithing. Only 43% of the church gave. And you're sitting in a building, I mean, this is a very generous church. We do well. And so people say, well, why are you doing this? Why are you talking about? Well, I'm not doing it to take up an offering. We do that at the beginning of the service because you're supposed to have already had it planned out what you were going to give to God before you ever got here. And we don't coerce you into giving. We're not trying to strong arm you into giving, but we need to talk about money. And I think that the other percentage of the people in the church want to give, but there's a bad side of money, and it's called debt. And we need to talk about it, and we need to really lay some things out about it. And I think the church desperately needs to talk about it because the world has a very skewed view of money. One of my favorite little pastimes, I have an app on my phone called the Urban Dictionary, and I like to see what people think about things. And so I thought I'll look up money and see what people say about money on Urban Dictionary and how they define money. So here's how they define it. The first definition is this. Money is a person possessing an outstanding personality, quality, social skill, physical appearance, or any exceptional ability or skill that makes them stand out, to be the best at something, to be skilled to the level of being as good as currency. So like this, Melissa's voice is money. Money. Or the way Aaron and Tina dress is money. Money. Look at that. Money. Okay? So skilled, it's a currency, man. Money. That's money. And then here's another definition of it on Urban Dictionary. It says, money, the currency that dominates your life. In life, you must go to school to have an opportunity to make large quantities of money. Once you can go to the job, you end up working for money until retirement, where you can spend your last years reflecting on all the time you wasted accumulating money instead of enjoying it. And my friends, that definition is money. It's money. It's all over it. And so the world has a very skewed view of money. And I think a lot of that is we don't talk about it. And when the church does talk about money, it's in this construed way of you give to get. Like if you give $1,000, we're going to send you some of Pastor Jason's sweat. That's not going to happen because there's no reason to do that. Actually, we have and we get to give. Instead of giving to get, we get to give. And so I think I read a very wonderful theological book the other day, and maybe you've read this theological book, and it's wonderful. I mean, you could preach out of this book all the time. It's called The Reader's Digest. Anybody else ever read out of that theological book and said, man, there's some good stuff in there, I'm going to preach that? Well, today I'm going to preach this story. I'd heard it one time, and then I read it in the Reader's Digest, and it just went like this. There was a woman who was traveling, and between her flights at the airport, she stopped into a lounge and she bought a small package of cookies. And she sat down, she began to read the newspaper, and she became aware of a rustling noise on the other side of her newspaper. And so she lowered her paper down, and she was flabbergasted to see this very neatly dressed man helping himself to her cookies. And she didn't want to make a scene, and so she leaned over and she took a cookie for herself. A minute or two passed by, and there was a little bit of more rustling of the paper, and she watched the man help himself to another cookie. And so she reached over and she took another cookie. And this went on until they were down to the last cookie, which the man broke the cookie in two. He slid half over to her and half for himself. And she is absolutely beside herself in anger and frustration over this. And about that time, her flight was announced, and she begins to head down towards her gate, and she opens up her purse and to get her ticket out. And as she reaches in to get her ticket out, to her shock and to her embarrassment, she found her pack of unopened cookies. Not only had she not been eating her cookies, she was eating his cookies. And so, often how you feel about the cookies and how you deal with the cookies depends a lot on who you think owns the cookies. And in talking about money, how you feel about money and how you handle money depends on who you think owns the money. And so we've been talking about this. This is a series based off of this game called life. And so when you sit down to play this game, it's very interesting. They give you a car. How many of y'all would like, thank God, they gave you a car. They give you a couple tokens, and they give you a card. It used to be you got so much money, but now they give you a card. And on the card is $400,000, $400K, right on your card. You're like, yes. And so when you play this game, you actually come into the game with nothing. You got invited to play. And then the banker spots you $400,000. So you're playing the whole game on the bank's money that they kind of gave you, and then you treat it as your own, and it becomes your money. But in reality, you didn't have anything to start with. Now, in this life, real life, it's really the same way. You got invited to play. You didn't choose to be born. You were just born, and you came into it with nothing. And so I thought I would give you some scriptures just to kind of back this up, to tell you who actually owns the money, okay? It isn't the bank. It isn't the banker. God owns the money. It's in Psalm 24 and verse 1. It says this: the earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness, everything that's in it, the world and those who dwell therein. Everything's God's. It's all God's. So who owns the money? God. God owns the money. And so then here's a few other verses for you. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 15, it says it like this: and as he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And then here's what the New Testament says about it in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. We came in with nothing. We got invited to play. We were asked to sit at a table to play this game called life. And God gave us some things in our lives. And everything that you have, everything that you possess, every bit of knowledge you have, God gave it to you. And he gave it to you to have the capacity to earn, to learn, to work. He gave you skills. And so your attitude and how you deal with things is really dependent upon who you believe owns the cookies. And if God owns the cookies, then maybe we should deal with things a little differently because God owns the cookies. Let me ask you something. Have you ever let somebody borrow something from you, and when they brought it back, it was in worse condition than what it was when you gave it to them? And what happens? The next time they call to borrow something, you're like, I don't own a truck. Truck? I don't have a truck. Why? Because they did not treat your stuff with any respect or honor because it was yours. And those are the type of people you don't want to bless. Actually, when you borrow something from somebody, you should take better care of it than what you would your own stuff. You know, when you borrow somebody's truck and you use it, you should fill it up with gas, take it down to the car wash and wash it and take it back to them. Why? Because the next time you move, you want to be able to borrow that truck again. And you should do it so well that they call you and say, hey, do you want to borrow my truck? I need a full tank of gas and a car wash. How we deal with things is really dependent on our view of who owns it. And how we deal with money, we think we own it when in fact God owns it. And so what I did is I wanted to know how to win this game, okay? I got invited to play this game, and I wanted to know how to win this game. So, and I did something rare. I didn't do it really to play the game. I did it more to prove a point. I read the instruction manual. So I know that God is in the miracle-working business because I, a male adult in America, read the instruction manual on something. So I read it. And I began to read it and understand how to play the game and how to get the best advantage based upon the rules of the game. And God gave us an instruction manual. And in that instruction manual, He teaches us the rules of the game that we've been invited to play with the skill sets and the things that He gave to us. There's a certain way to play the game and to use the rules, God's Word, as the means for the path of how to be the most successful with what we've been given to play. We got to do that. Now, before we think, oh, you know what, I'm going to play this game and I'm going to do it all on my own. And at the end of this game, when it's time to cash out, that I have done it all by myself. God wrote something to some people that they were in the similar circumstances. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, and God is saying to the people of Israel, He said, you may say to yourself, because you're going into this promised land and you've got houses that you didn't pay for and you got lands, but there may come a time when you think you've done this all on your own. And you would say that it's by my power and the strength of my hands that have produced this wealth for me. But He said, but remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. So He's saying, listen, you're not in that place all by yourself, but I placed you there. I'm the one that has done this thing. So before we think we deserve all of the credit, we have to remember that we wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for God. That He owns it. And so how we handle the money really is determined upon whether or not we continue to remind ourselves whether or not God owns it or we do. And if we're going to read God's instruction booklet, and I know that we are not reading God's instruction booklet because of the results of where we are as a society and where we are as church folk, as Christian believers, we're not reading God's Word in His instruction manual. So I think it would be good for me to kind of go through some of those instructions. There's 2,000 verses relating to finances, money in the church that God's saying, hey, this is how you need to handle it. This is how you need to deal with it. And then what we do is we decry God because we don't have, but we're not following God's playbook. And so I thought I would ask you a question. How much freedom would you have if you didn't have any debt? How much freedom would you have if you didn't have any debt? Now, let's read you a few things. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 7, it says this: the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. All right, here's Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 6. For the Lord your God will bless you just as He promised you. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. Whoever has the money rules, right? Psalm 37, verse 21, the wicked borrow and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. And just so somebody doesn't email me later and say, those are all Old Testament, I thought I would throw in a New Testament just to head off your email before you hit send. Romans chapter 13 and verse 8 says it like this: owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Now, how do I know that we are not following God's playbook? Let me give you some statistics. In June of 2017, Americans broke a record. And the record originally was set in April of 2008. And that record we broke was we amassed over $1 trillion in credit card debt. Trillion. Now, if you know how many zeros that is, you're doing amazing. $1 trillion in credit card debt. And let me put that on more of a local level. Just about 2 years ago, we had a financial peace class in this church, and it happens a lot in this church. We believe in that. There was 9 to 12 families represented in this financial peace class, and there was over $80,000 in credit card debt in 9 to 12 families. That's a whole lot of credit card debt. Now, let me give you another little statistic. The scripture, the collective household debt. I just gave you the credit card debt, $1 trillion. The collective household debt that our Americans are now under. So now we've got student loans, cars, houses, all the other debt in there. We are now nearing $13 trillion as Americans. Americans. Matter of fact, Americans now die with an average of $62,000 in debt. How do I know that we're not reading the rule book? Because here's what the rule book says. Here's what God's word says about that. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 22, it says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And instead now we are amassing debt that we're just saying, here you go. You deal with it. I'm gone. I'm going to leave it to you. And I would tell you, we're not being good. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and instead we are amassing, on average, $62,000 worth of debt that we're telling our children, have a good time dealing with that, I'm gone. So somebody asked me, so why do you want to talk about money? Why is money such a big deal? I think money is a very, very important topic, and here's why. And specifically debt, because debt will squeeze you. Debt will squeeze the joy out of your life. It'll squeeze the peace out of your life, and it'll squeeze the freedom right out of your life. Debt. And here's how I know that. Nearly 80%, 8 out of 10 divorces in America, finances are the number one issue. Finances. Number one issue, 80% of divorces, finances are mentioned in the divorce. So I think we need to talk about debt. We need to talk about it drastically because this is a series about life's decisions. And last week we talked about decisions that derail your life or decisions that elevate your life. And when you start dealing with finances and not dealing with them correctly, it's going to lead to another decision. You're going to get into debt, or you brought debt into the marriage, and then, you know, we got to have everything. So we go out and we start, we discovered Discover Card, and some of you discovered it so much you're not allowed to discover anything else. And so you get so much debt, then it begins to weigh on your marriage. It begins to squeeze your marriage. And so then, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a divorce. And then you're going to take half the debt. I'm going to take half the debt. And then we're both going to find somebody else, and they have debt. And now they're bringing debt into the marriage, and I'm bringing my old debt into the marriage. And now our marriage is already set up to deal with this stress, this squeeze, and no joy, no peace, no freedom. And now we've got all this debt, and we're supposed to be happily married and living this fairy tale of happily ever after, and oh my goodness, we've got debt. And then, okay, so now then that one happens, and so we're going to get divorced, and now you got half of the debt of the first one and half of the debt of the second one, and then you go get married again and you collect more debt. And the marriage and the decisions just keep compounding and compounding and compounding, and debt does that to you. And we're all raised up to live this fairy tale, right? That when we get married, by the time we walk from the back of the church down front and we say, I do, that when we walk out of the church building, we will have everything that our parents had and then some. Everything my mom and dad have, we're going to have it and then some. It's the fairy tale. We were taught it in Hollywood. We're taught it in every aspect that you live this fairy tale, that we're just going to get together. We're going to live in this castle, and there's going to be horses, and it's going to be amazing. And he was a frog, but he's now a prince, and it's awesome. Let me read to you what the fairy tale actually is today in America. The prince was deeply in debt for the beautiful 4-bedroom castle and the new 6-horse chariot. And he had financed that at a high interest rate. And the princess was still paying for her school loans to Princess University. And she had racked up a lot of credit card debt while buying all the new clothes and the accessories that she had worn to the prince's ball. And it took all of their money to pay all the bill. And after a year or so, they began fighting over their increasing amount of debt. And the prince wanted to buy a new flat panel TV for the den. And the princess wanted to go to Hawaii for vacation. Plus, both of their parents were pressuring them for grandchildren. And it wasn't long before the prince started spending more and more time at work and with his friends. And the princess spent more and more money decorating the castle to keep up with the Joneses. And arguments and bitterness and silence followed. And finally, the prince filed for divorce. He got the chariots, she got the castle, and they lived unhappily ever after. And if you don't deal with this, that's where you're going to end up. Unhappily ever after. So you need to understand, debt affects your marriage. Debt actually affects everything. And so I thought I would give you just a few principles just to live by, because I stated the negative right there, and I wanted to give you some practical things to help. Number one, you need to minimize your debt. You have to minimize your debt. Let me say that like this. If you're just starting out and you don't have it, don't get it. Let me just do a little math for you. And I'll put this in the bottom of your worship guides and the points to ponder, because I wanted you to go home and I wanted some of y'all to think about this and think about this and think about this. If you do the math and you have $7,500 in credit card debt and you make the minimum payment of $150, it's going to take you 30 years to pay it off. And this is what it's going to cost you, $26,334.53. So you paid $18,834.53 to Visa for the right and the privilege to have the same pair of jeans as Mrs. Jones. And what happens is we get into this concept that I have to have it and I have to have it right now. Y'all remember that commercial? I want my money and I want it right now. The problem is we're not even talking about money. It's I want this and I want it right now. And I'm not going to go home without it. And then you wind up paying so much more over the top of what it would have cost you had you just waited. $18,000 you just gave up for $7,500. And it's 30 years down the road. So minimize your debt. Number two, you need to go slower in accumulating things. Okay? Don't try to accumulate in 1 year what it took your parents 30 years to accumulate. I want that car and I want this and I want that, and they got this awesome outdoor, but you don't get that in 1 year. You have to be slow. There's nothing wrong with starting off your marriage in a one-bedroom apartment down by the meat marketplace. That's where Melissa and I, we didn't eat pork for years in our marriage because every Tuesday morning they were slaughtering the pigs outside of our apartment. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't need a 4-bedroom house. There was 2 of us, and we were only using 2 rooms anyway. We never used the kitchen. It's perfectly acceptable to rent a small apartment or home for a little while. The family-friendly home can wait. Number 3, work together in your marriage. I am amazed. I'm astounded as when we get into marriage counseling and I ask, do you guys talk about this? No. Well, that's why 80% of marriages, finances, are the issue why they're getting divorced, because they don't talk about it. Let's not talk about things. And Melissa and I are trying to figure out a way to articulate this to all of you ladies and all of you men in this house that, while I'm the head of my house, she's the neck. And we have a respectful, honorable marriage. And so, yes, I'm the man of my house, and I wear the pants in my house. Melissa just chooses what color they are. Why? Because we're a team. It's Team McKinnies. It's not Melissa against Jason. It's not Jason against Melissa. It's the McKinnies family and what we're going to do. You need to communicate in your marriage and work together for the finances. And if you don't know what the finances are, how can you articulate whether or not you should or should not buy something? Work together in your marriage. And then lastly, know when to say enough. How many purses do you need? And Melissa's translation of that is 1 clutch, One on the shoulder, one that you carry, one of that brand, one of this brand, and one of that brand, one of every design of that brand. That's Melissa's. But seriously, how many pairs of jeans do you need? How many shoes do you need? You have to learn when to say enough is enough. When does it happen? You got to know when to say, this is it. And so somebody asked me this one time, so I thought I would just cover the line. Well, but what about you and Melissa? I mean, you guys all got this clothes and stuff and do all this. So let me let you in on a little secret that Melissa and I, how we shop. I go to the clearance stores and I shop clearance. You know what I mean by that? Let me translate that to you. I go to TJ Maxx and I walk past all the regular price stuff and I look for the black and the red signs. That's Jason's aisle right there. I go to the clearance aisles and I shop the clearance at the clearance stores. Why? Because my boss is a Jewish guy and I act a lot like him. I'm tight. I like the money in my pocket instead of theirs. You go into my office, people walk into my office like, oh man, your office is amazing. Yes, it is. The curtains in my office were an old backdrop off of this, and I got used furniture from a wonderful person in the building. When you go to my house, most of the furniture in my house was used in a display store somewhere. So, just because you look at it and go, oh, that has to be this way, you don't know the backstories to it. And you ought to get around some people that can make wise decisions and stay out of debt. And know when enough is enough. When is enough enough? And because there is this chronic desire in our lives for more. And actually, I thought I would show you this wonderful picture for you because you're the 11 o'clock crowd. Hopefully, you've had breakfast already when you see this picture. Or if afterwards, maybe God will delete this out of your mind so that you can have. But I want to show you this picture, and I'm using it on purpose up here. Does anybody know what that is? If you said a leech, you're partially correct. That's actually a pregnant leech. And there's actually some scripture for that because this chronic desire for more, I need more, it's a leech. And it's found in Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 15. And it says it like this: the leech has 2 daughters. And they say, give and give. And there are 3 things that are never satisfied, and 4 never say enough. Give. A leech. What does a leech do? A leech attaches itself to you and it sucks the life out of you, blood. That's what debt does. And the interesting thing about a leech is that when a leech bites you, it actually gives you anesthetic, which means you don't know it bit you. And what happens with debt is while it may feel good when you're swiping the card and you got those brand new rock revivals and it's amazing, look at that, you don't realize you've been bit until you get this big long credit card and you're $30,000 in debt, but you only have to pay $150. You don't realize you just got bit and you now are getting the life sucked out of you, and debt is squeezing you, and there is no joy, there is no peace, and there is no freedom in your life. So the question remains, how much freedom would you have if you didn't have any debt? Because what's happening is God is trying to speak to you, and God's trying to tell you, hey, I want you to do this, and you're saying, but I can't. Why? Because you're in debt. You are strapped to the maximum in debt. And you can't do the will of God for your life because you are buying into what our culture is saying. You need more, and you need more. We walk up to people and we say, boy, that's a beautiful home you got. What kind of car do you drive? There's one guy in my life that he will not compliment a thing that I'm wearing until he has checked the brand that I've got on. So I was very specific today in what I wore. I'm wearing a Hart Schaffner and Marks. It's a nice suit coat. But what they don't know is I paid $20 for it. See, that's our culture. You got to have more. You got to keep up with the Joneses. And so we're living in Leechville. We've been bitten and we don't even understand what's happening. And that's why you need to come to church today. And I'm trying to use God's word to get a spade shovel underneath your skin to pluck that leech off of you so that you can get your life back and you can get some freedom back in your life, get some joy and some peace, and you'll stay married. And so I think today is a day that we need a title today, The Enough Day. We've got enough. It's enough. And if your name's Jones is in here, we love you, and we're so glad that you've got so much stuff. And we freely admit you've got all kinds of stuff, and we're glad that you've got it and we don't. Because here's the thing. You just need to accept that there's always going to be somebody that has something nicer than you, better than you, more money than you, and stop trying to keep up with the Joneses. Just be who you are and live within the means that God has given you to steward in your life. So you need to make a decision. I'm not going to try to keep up with the Joneses. I don't want to be the Joneses. I don't want to be around the Joneses. And I'm going to bless the Joneses. They do amazing stuff over there. Have at it. You go for it. You're awesome people. You're wonderful. But I can't keep up with you. I'm not going to try to keep up with you. I'm not going to ruin my marriage, my reputation, my peace, my joy, trying to make sure that I have everything that they have. So you need to declare that the Joneses are the winners, congratulate them, and then live your life. Live your life at the level that you can live. And make a decision that if God raises your income, you're not just going to increase your acquiring, but you're going to use it to give more. And can I tell you, if we as a church community would actually seriously take this message to heart, seriously declare that it's enough. We've got enough. Do you realize what would happen if every believer actually gave? And this is the last point to ponder down in the bottom of your worship guide. And I wanted you to see this in black and white. And I'm going to read it. Studies have shown that if Christians would tithe, within 2 years, every church facility in the world would be paid for. Every ministry would be functional and out of debt. And every Christian university, Bible school, and training center would be funded. And every hungry person would be fed. Now, let me put that into the local context. I told you that on our best month of this year, 2017, on our best year, 43% of this church gave. I didn't say tithe. I said 43% of this church gave. On that Sunday, 43%. That was our best. Our worst was in July when 11% gave. Of the amount of people that came in, 11%. But can you imagine, look at what this church already does in our community and what we're trying to do around the world. Can you imagine what this church could do if every believer actually gave? That's an amazing question. What could we do? Then my next question is, what lesson are you passing down? Because like it or not, we've all learned about money some way, shape, or form. And I recognize that a lot of you, a lot of people at the 9 o'clock, a lot of people in this service and probably in the next service, this is the first time you've ever had this kind of a conversation about money in the church. I get that. And so most of what we have learned about money is what the world has said. And then what we do talk about in the church is misconstrued. I mean, let's just face it. There are people have totally jacked up giving in the kingdom of God. We have made a mockery of giving. And you got to be obedient to God when it comes to giving. That's why we don't get up here and say specific amounts. If God tells you to give $10, then you give $10. If God tells you to give $1 million, you give $1 million. You have to do whatever God tells you to do because obedience is better than the sacrifice. If you have the $1 million to give and you give the $10 because God said give $10, but you go ahead and give the $1 million, I would still tell you that you're in disobedience because God said give 10. You have to listen to what God says. And that's why we don't get up here and oh, hey, we need this and we need that. No, if you actually begin, this is the lesson you need to learn. You've got to listen to God. And if we trust God in all paths of righteousness and of truth, why don't we trust God with money? It's His. What lessons are you passing down? So I wanted to tell you, listen, we get to give. We don't give to get, we get to give. And God is already given. He's given you things, and everything that we have is already God's. So we already have, so we need to do our part, and we need to give. We've got to give. And these are the lessons that we need to pass down. And how do I know that we're not passing these lessons down? Well, we take up an offering in our children's ministry. And the collective total over the last few weeks has been the average of $1. Now, they didn't know that I was going to use that statistic. I just asked the question. How much has been coming in the children's offering? Because, well, I mean, the point isn't to raise enough money over there in the kids' wing to pay off the building. The point is to pass down to our children that, listen, when you come to God's house, everything that we have is God's anyway. We need to make sure we're passing down to our children the principles of God, not just in giving, but in everything. Pass the principles down to your children and make sure that they understand why you do what you do. Listen, this is what it says in Psalm 34, verse 11. He says, "Come, you children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord." Now, you all know I'm going to use this next verse, right? It's Proverbs 22, verse 6. You've all heard it. You hear it in every baby dedication we do in the church. Train up a child in the way that he should go, that when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? Do you know what the next verse down says? I read it to you earlier. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 7. It's the one where it says the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is subject to the lender. I mean, isn't it amazing? The verse before, he says, train up your children in the way that they should go, that when they are old, they will not depart from it. And the next verse, he says, let's talk about finances. We need to train our children about finances and tell our children, do not get into credit card debt. Do not let your peace and your freedom and your joy be robbed because MasterCard is available in your pocket. You know what the slogan is, right? Because here's what the world teaches, right? For everything else, there's MasterCard. Even if you can't afford it, just pull out MasterCard. Did you know that American families right now, on average, spend 10% more than they make? Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Now, your government's not teaching you this because your government's doing more than that. But you cannot sustain that kind of a life spending more than you bring in. You cannot sustain it. And what we're doing and what our government is teaching is to pass it down to another generation and another generation, another generation, and another generation and another generation. And we got so many trillions of dollars now in debt, we're never going to see the light of day. And that mentality cannot come into the church. Train them up. The reality is we all learn about money. We learn it from somebody. Most of us learn about it from our parents. And so my question is, what did you learn? Did you learn to be impulsive? Did you learn to be worried? Did you learn how to be generous? Did you learn to hoard? Did you learn to flaunt? Or did you learn how to give? What did you learn? What is it that you are modeling? Because right now, the reason why I say that is we're living in an era right now that tempts parents to give their children too little time and too little energy, and then we overcompensate by giving them too much money.
So good.
And the greatest financial gift that you can give to your children is not money. It is to model a behavior in front of them, to model a financial life in front of them. And my friends, you can model credit card abuse, you can model credit debt, chronic debt, neglect of tithing, neglect of giving, you can model recreational shopping, or you can model wisdom. You can model simplicity. You can model humility and generosity, and you're modeling one of those. So I thought some of these behaviors are modeled. Like people say a bowl of ice cream will solve your breakup problem. That's a behavior that's we're told. So that when you break up, you eat bonbons. I've never had a bonbon in my life. I don't know what they taste like. I don't even know where you buy bonbons. But apparently when you're heartbroken, you eat a bonbon. That's the behavior. Or you know what? Just go out and get this and buy this and do this. Or here's another thing that's told. If you have a child, it'll fix your marriage. My friend, there couldn't be anything further from the truth. Okay? Listen, if y'all didn't get along when you could get a full night's rest and you didn't have somebody crying and screaming and needing a diaper changed, and I know some woman's going to say, well, that's my husband. But listen, when you bring a child into it, it's going to change everything. And if you were already fighting, you wait till you get 30 minutes of sleep in 3 weeks and see if you're fighting at the end of that. A child does not fix your marriage. And debt and buying people stuff that you can't afford will not make them your friends. So, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan? Because if you don't have a plan, you'll just do anything. In Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 15 talks about making a plan. And Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, he's telling the church in Corinth, he said, on the first day of every week, you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, and that's what you bring to the house of the Lord. Get a plan. And the plan that we teach in every one of our classes, and I need to say this because I read the prayer requests. I read them every week. I pray over the prayer requests. I mean, that's what I do, okay? I read them. And I look at the amount of people asking for help financially I need prayer for my finances. I need prayer for my finance. And then I call the leaders of Financial Peace and the leaders of Blessed Life. And I go, how many people did y'all have in your class? And we get maybe like 2 showing up to Blessed Life. And then the people in Financial Peace, it varies, but rarely is it ever over 10 people. But yet I see hundreds of prayer requests for finances, and it doesn't add up. I mean, we can only lead you to water for so long. We're throwing salt blocks out there, but if you need help and you need to get a plan. So you need to get into Financial Peace, and if you've been through Financial Peace and you say it didn't work, I'm going to tell you, you're doing it wrong. You need to get back into finance. And we do not offer scholarships to Financial Peace. We offer scholarships to a lot of things, but Financial Peace, at some point, you have to make an investment in yourself, and you're going to invest in yourself. You're going to buy a book that's going to give you a plan on how to get out of debt and how to become a giver instead of a taker, how to become a giver instead of a spender. We offer those classes. They're going on right now. Tonight, right here in this auditorium, Blessed Life. Over there in Auditorium D on Thursday nights, Financial Peace. We're offering any resource we can. Out of the 7 core classes that we teach in this church, that means they're classes that will never go away. 2 of them, 2 of the 7 deal with finances. Why? It's that big of a deal. You need to get a plan. So I thought, because most of you probably want to invest in yourself, I'll tell you the plan. We in this church teach the 10-10-80 plan. And my first question to any person that wants prayer over their finances is this: are you a tither? Because it's really difficult for me. As great as y'all think I am, it is an impossibility for me to pray a blessing in an area of your life that you're living under a curse. And if you don't tithe, you may still have your 100%, but your 100% is cursed. As for me and my house, I would rather have my 90% blessed than my 100% cursed. So we give to God. It's the first thing we do. So we need to get a plan. 10% to God, and then 10% you should pay yourself. Isn't that a noble idea? Pay yourself. Melissa and I, early on in our lives, we made a plan that one day we were going to grow old counting seashells and walking down beaches. And we pay ourselves. How do we do that? We started retirement accounts, retirement funds, making investments. And on my phone, I have the Dave Ramsey retirement calculator. And I always tell Melissa, every time she gets ready to purchase something, I show her that little calculator and I say, look at what we could get 30 years down the road if you would put that LV back on the shelf. 10% to God, 10% pay yourself. Here it is, Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 20, and I just want to read this to you. This is the New King James. There is a desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. Let me read it out of Melissa's translation. The wise have wealth and luxury. That's the NLT. The wise have wealth and luxury, but a fool spend whatever they get. You just spend it. You need to set some money aside for you. Okay? I don't know if you know this or not. I'm 40, but Social Security will not be there when I get there. And so the only person that cares about Jason is Jason. And you need to spend on yourself. Isn't this the most fantastic sermon you've ever heard at church? So 10 to God. 10 to yourself, and then 80%. Now listen, the 80% isn't just for you to do whatever you want to do. The 80% is for you to steward. And we have to steward everything in life. You have to steward your finances. You have to steward your marriage. You have to steward your children. You have to steward pain. You have to steward grief. You have to manage it. And so the 80% left, you have to steward. Why do I say all that? Why am I saying that? Because here's the thing. When I read this book, I wanted to know how you win. How do you win? Well, the first person done with the board, the first person to retire, they get the most money. And so you may not have had all the money, be winning, but if you retire first, you get the most money. And then the rules of the game are just simple. Whoever has the most money in the bank, in their bank account, on their card, wins. And that's the rules of the world right now. Whoever has the most, that's the winner. Whoever has the biggest, the best, the latest, they're the winner. But That's not what this book says. That's the rules that we're being taught, is the more you have, the more you've accumulated, you win. I was trying to do the math of how many funerals we've done in this church. I know that I've done just right around 230 funerals in my time as pastor here. Pastor Kerry does funerals. We have a lot of pastors who do other funerals. We've done a lot of funerals, which means we've had a lot of conversations with people as they get ready to transition from this life to the next. And not one of those conversations has it ever been about accumulating anything. It's never been, boy, my portfolio is sure amazing. Boy, isn't it wonderful? No, it's been, boy, I should have spent more time. I should have done this. I should have done that. What they're doing is they're kind of taking an audit of their life. They're just kind of going through their life and saying, boy, that didn't matter. That didn't matter. This is what mattered. And the reason why I'm saying this to you is because there's going to be a day that I'm going to stand before God and I'm going to be audited. I'm going to have to give an account. I'm going to have to give an account of what I said in this pulpit, what I didn't say in this pulpit, what I taught you, what I didn't teach you, what God told me to say. Did I say it? Did I not say it? All those things. And I needed to talk to you about money because I'm going to stand before God when I give an account as pastor and say, I said it. I taught it. Here it is. Likewise, you're going to come and you're going to give an account. Let's call that preparing for the final audit. The final audit of your life. It won't happen here. You're going to be standing before Christ. In Luke chapter 12 and verse 48, Jesus is talking. It's the parable of the good servant and the evil servant. And he's talking and he says, to whom much has been given, much is required. To whom had much, much more would be required out of them. And so I wanted you to just take an audit here today to prepare for that final audit. Get all your receipts in order, get all of those decisions. And I want to ask you, what are you doing with what God gave you? I mean, you're preparing for that final audit. What have you done with what God has given to you? Have you treated it like it was yours and then got mad when God wanted to consume a little bit of it? Or are you going to be like that lady and really realize it wasn't yours to begin with? It was His. And what did you do with it? What are you going to do? And I think it'd be a good day for some of you to make a decision that I have enough. I have enough. And I want to become a giver. I want to be able, when I'm walking down the street and God says, I want you to give to that person. I don't want to have to wonder, can I make it from here forward? No, I want to be able to do what God tells me to do. So here's what I want you to do. I just want you to bow your head and I want you to take a moment and I just want you to do kind of a final audit right now. What are you doing with what God has given to you? Are you hoarding it? Are you flaunting it? Are you scared, fearful, worry? Are you generous? What are you doing? Because there's a final audit coming. And everything that you have been given will be accounted for. So I just ask that the Holy Spirit would speak to you to teach you how to deal with your money. Because right now your money is dealing with you. And it's robbing you of your peace and your joy and your freedom. And you need to handle your money. Get a plan. Turn it over to God. And then have peace and joy and freedom back in your life. And pass it down to your children. that we have what we have has nothing to do with me, but the blessings of the Lord have been upon this family because we stewarded well what God gave us. So Holy Spirit, speak to us. In Jesus' name I pray. And all of God's people said, amen.